Okay, good evening everybody. You're all very welcome. It's not the nicest of evenings to be out, so I appreciate you all being here. So I have worked in the area of sleep disorders medicine for, about 15 years or so as a sleep physiologist, and just a couple of months ago I've actually stopped my job in the Mater Private Hospital where I worked in the sleep lab, and I'm doing solely the Insomnia Clinic. It's just got so busy, I just had to dedicate all my time to it. So that'll just tell you how prevalent this actual problem with insomnia is, okay? So I suppose to start off, the first thing we need to talk about is how do we look at sleep? Because a lot of us, it's very hard if you've had a bad night's sleep, and if you think, say this time, if I asked any of you tonight, how did you sleep last night? You'd probably find it difficult to answer because we kind of tend to forget and we don't really know too much and can't remember too much. But the only way we can actually determine whether somebody's asleep or not, because you could all sit back there in your seats, close your eyes and stay really still for the next hour or so, and I've absolutely no way of knowing whether you're actually asleep or not. The only way is to get rigged up like this, where you put a whole load of electrodes onto the scalp to look at your brain activity. And that's how we determine whether somebody's actually asleep or awake, because we have these different states. So we have wakefulness and we have sleep. And sleep can be broken up into non-REM sleep and REM sleep. So what happens is all these electrodes goes onto the patient's head, and we all know what it's like, or majority of us would know what it's like to look at, say, an ECG recording, the electrical activity of the heart. What we're doing here is just looking at the electrical activity of the brain, and it just has different patterns. So this here is what we would kind of look at in a laboratory where we're looking at sleep physiology. So we'd be looking at brain activity, but we also need to look at other certain features as well to see what's happening with sleep. So we look at eye movements, which are here. We also look at things like muscle tone, and we use that by looking at the chin. We look at leg movements, and then of course we look at breathing. So there's a couple of different ways we look at breathing. We look at chest movements, abdominal movements, and we usually have a little thing stuck up somebody's nose looking at as they breathe in and breathe out through the nose. And we also look then at oxygen levels and heart rate and movement as well. So I said we would literally look at the whole night long, and then when somebody was going to analyse their sleep, which I used to do up until a couple of months ago, that's what I would sit down to every morning to look at. But as I said, there's different stages of this sleep that we go through, and these are kind of what happens. So first of all, if we were to put electrodes on all you guys' heads, we would see something like the top one, okay? So the electrical activity in your brain is really fast frequency because you're all awake and alert. By the time I'm finished talking, it might be something like this where you get all bored and just nod off. I won't hold offence, don't worry. So as somebody starts to feel sleepy, the brain activity actually starts to slow down a wee bit, and this is what we call stage 1 sleep. That's just the bridge between being awake and asleep. That's the kind of, if you've ever been lying there and you don't really know, am I actually awake or am I asleep? You don't know because you're aware of everything that's going on around you. It's really just that bridge between awake and asleep. And we'd only need about 5% of our night's sleep would be made up of that because it's absolutely useless to us. Pretty quickly then we go into what we call stage 2 sleep. Brain activity actually slows down another wee bit, and it's just got different characteristics. And it also has these kind of what we call K complexes, or we can have these kind of sleep spindles. And these sleep spindles, we're starting to learn more and more about them. We used to think that they just happened in the stage 2 sleep, but we're now starting to think that they can actually happen in all stages of sleep. We also think that these sleep spindles, they're little intrusions of basically not so much wakefulness, but we think it's kind of like where the mind or the body is actually, or the brain is actually transferring information that we've actually learned during the day. So this is kind of like we are just transferring files of information to slot into the different areas of the brain. And then about half of our night's sleep would actually be made up of that. What happens then, about an hour after we've initially fallen asleep, we actually go into a really, really deep stage of sleep. So the whole brain activity actually really slows down. This is a very stable stage of sleep. And usually if you've ever heard of somebody saying, I was asleep and there could have been an explosion or a hurricane outside and I never heard it, they're probably in that stage of sleep. Teenagers, children get a lot of that deep sleep because things like growth hormone is produced in that. Adults would need about 20% of their night's sleep made up of that. Teenagers, children, a lot more. There's a lot of research now being done into children's sleep. We now know that children that sleep poorly, it can lead to growth suppression because they're just not getting enough of this deep, good quality sleep. That's also where the whole body repairs itself. So muscles recuperate, cells regenerate. I mean, they're even looking at sleep in the whole area of skin care. We now know that if you're not getting enough restorative sleep, cells are not regenerating, so you actually can lead to premature aging. So if you all want to look really young, you have to look after your sleep, okay? Then what happens about 90 minutes after you initially fall asleep, or what should be happening, is your whole brain activity is going to speed up again. And it can look, this is it here, and it can look pretty much like you could even be awake. But there's a couple of very distinct changes because obviously you're not awake. What happens is, as I said, brain activity speeds up, but what happens is your breathing can become a little bit more unstable, your heart rate can be a little bit more erratic, and your muscles become completely paralysed. But there's a couple of muscles that still work, which are your respiratory muscles, because you're going to continue to breathe, and the other one then are your eye muscles, because you have these rapid eye movements. You've actually gone into dream sleep now. So that's about the first 90 to 2 hours into your sleep cycle. And that's a whole cycle of sleep done. So what happens is the whole thing just starts to repeat itself again. But this is it all, a night's sleep put together. So what I've just talked you through is this kind of first 2 hours here. But as you can see, the whole thing just starts to repeat itself. If you look here, the first third of the night is where you get your really good deep sleep. As the night progresses, dream sleep gets a little bit longer. And usually if you remember your dreams, a lot of time people ask me about dreams and do they mean anything, and sometimes I remember them, sometimes they don't. Usually we tend to remember them at this portion of the night because we're more prone to little brief awakenings at the latter end of the night, because the need for sleep is no longer there if you've already had sleep here. So these brief awakenings, perfectly normal to remember your dreams, but equally it's perfectly normal not to remember your dreams. And how that process looks is really going to determine how you feel and how you function the next day, because this is such an organised process. And usually when this process breaks down, it's because there's some kind of a problem with sleep there. And as I said, it leads to kind of impairment of your daytime functioning. The one thing that how we don't measure sleep is by the Fitbits or all of these kind of things we wear on our arms, or all these apps we have on the phone. More and more people are actually using these to nearly self-diagnose themselves. I know certainly after Christmas I was inundated with people ringing me up and saying, oh, I need to come to see you, and I'd say, well, what are your symptoms? And their main symptom was, well, my Fitbit that I got for Christmas is telling me I'm not sleeping well. These are not accurate at all. They're fine for measuring steps and heart rate and all that, but when it comes to sleep, when you're after seeing just exactly how we do measure sleep, you cannot rely on these, okay? They're recreational purposes, and sometimes if you have a problem with sleep and you introduce these, because a lot of the time they underestimate your sleep, they actually make the problem much worse. And people that have problems with sleep, they're nearly obsessed with sleep anyway. And when you start looking at this every morning, it just, as I said, it just makes the problem worse. So as I said, this is not how you measure sleep. As I said, if you're reading it from your Fitbit or a phone app, forget it. And there's been loads of studies to kind of back that up as well, okay? Next thing is, sleep is not something that just happens, okay? And if you're having a problem with sleep, you know that very well, because you've probably tried too hard to make it happen. We have this inbuilt rhythm that really determines when we sleep and when we wake. And it's a thing called a circadian rhythm, okay? And a lot of the time when you have a problem with sleep, this just comes out of whack. And when we look at sleep, we always look at what we call this rhythm of just 24 hours. Now, in fact, our rhythm is a little bit more than, it's just over 24 hours, but it's easier to slot it into the 24 hours. So what this basically means is, and we always look at sleep from 12 noon to the following 12 noon. So the first thing we need to think about is a core body temperature. And sleep or temperature has a huge role to play in our sleep-wake cycle. You'll also notice that I keep talking about the sleep-wake. It's not sleep and it's not wakefulness. The two of them are in this 24-hour cycle. So one affects the other. So from the time we wake up, our core body temperature is increasing. Post lunchtime, there's a little dip, and then it starts to increase again, reaching its highest around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then it starts to decrease rapidly. What happens then is we need to think about a thing called a sleep propensity, or a need for sleep, or a sleep debt. And what that means is that during our wakeful hours, we are constantly accumulating this sleep debt. So obviously, the longer you're awake, the more the sleep debt. And unfortunately, most debts have to be paid back. So you can only go for so long without sleep. And I'd get a lot of people ring me up in a real panic, you know, I need to come to see you as quickly as possible. I haven't slept in weeks, or I haven't slept in months. That's not true, because you can't go for that long without sleeping. And a good kind of way of thinking about sleep, and to kind of help take the anxiety out of not sleeping, if I got you all to sit there and hold your breath and not breathe, okay? Some people can do it for a bit longer, but eventually the need for breathing is going to override that, and you're going to start breathing again, no matter how hard you try to not breathe. Sleep is exactly the same thing. You can go for so long, but eventually that need for sleep, the body's need for sleep, will override that, and you will sleep. So as I said, you will always sleep, you'll have to sleep eventually. So this sleep debt, as I said, keeps increasing during your wakeful hours. So the longer you're awake, the more you need sleep. Again, post lunchtime, there's that little dip, and this is where the whole idea of the siesta comes into place, and that's perfectly normal. We don't know why it's there, but it is. Majority of people, or if you have the luxury of having a siesta, you'll probably only sleep for an hour. You won't sleep for your full 8 hours, because the one thing that won't be missing is a thing called melatonin. Melatonin, when it comes to sleep, is really, really important. Melatonin is a sleep promoter. It makes us feel sleepy. I know looking at this, it's a little bit deceiving. It looks, oh look, I don't make any melatonin, but then suddenly come, 8 o'clock at night, it starts to increase. It's not like that. Melatonin is only produced when there's a lack of light. So if you think of the poor shift workers, they will continue working here, still going to be light, so their melatonin levels are going to continue to be low. And that has a huge impact on their long-term health as well. There's been a lot of research going into shift workers, mainly people like nurses, and we know that they're at increased risk of breast cancer. Shift workers, increased risk of prostate cancers, and it's now actually regarded as a carcinogen. Shift worker disorder can be carcinogen, which is a cancer-causing trait. So that, as I said, melatonin is very important, but we only produce it when there's no light. If you've been lucky enough to go off on a nice holiday to the States or anything, you can buy it over the counter there. You can buy it in some of the health food shops as well in other European countries. But it is quite, it's only prescribed here, and the prescribing laws are quite strict. And as I said, usually it's only used in jet lag. And as I said, it's fine to use for jet lag, because what it does is it pulls back this whole rhythm. So that's your melatonin. So 3 things need to happen in order to feel sleepy. You can see your core body temperature needs to dip. The need for sleep must be there, plus that source of melatonin must be there. So where the 3 of these come into contact, for majority of people, it's around 11 o'clock at night, and that's where we tend to feel sleepy. Where the opposite happens, it's usually around 7. That's where we tend to wake up. So that's really, if you take it back to the very, very basics, we are built to sleep when it's dark and be awake when it's bright. But unfortunately, we are surrounded by things that are taking away our sense of time. Light levels. We're sitting here under this light. This light is a cue to our bodies to say, you should be awake. Okay? A lot of the light bulbs as well we use now are energy efficient ones. They actually reduce melatonin because it's blue light that they actually produce. Okay? It's exactly like the smart devices, and I'll mention them a little bit later on. So as I said, we're living in a society now where it's really 24/7, and we're just losing this whole sense of time, and it's playing havoc with our sleep, okay? Sleep deprivation, as I said, it's affecting an awful lot of people. I think about 20% of the population suffers from sleep deprivation. That's an awful lot of people. Don't ask me what the world population is. I don't know. I don't have the figure, but it's a lot of people, okay? And I said 20%. So, with this 20% of the world's population walking around sleep deprived, what kind of effects is that actually going to have? We all know the short-term effects of not having a good night's sleep, okay? You're probably yawning, you're sleepy, you might be a little bit more cranky than normal, okay? And we all know what it's like if a little kid or a little child is sleep deprived. Adults are exactly the same, okay? And as I said, we have these short-term effects. But what we have then is the long-term effects of sleep deprivation, and they're well documented. We know that poor sleepers, they have a lower or a poor immune system because the body's not repairing itself. So people that if don't sleep well, they are more prone to picking up colds and flus than the person that's a good sleeper. And if they do pick up something, it's probably taking them a little bit longer to recover. We even know that people that have broken bones or anything, and if they're a poor sleeper, recovery time will be actually longer than a good sleeper. So, as I said, impaired immune system, as I said, can be one of the long-term consequences of not sleeping. As well as that, we can have the risk of diabetes, all the cardiovascular diseases, because this is all going back to that whole 24-hour cycle. There are different physiological occurrences happening within that 24-hour period. So if that whole rhythm is not in the correct rhythm, none of those physiological processes are actually happening the way they should be either. So it can lead to, as I said, all these awful long-term effects. And as I said, I mentioned as well, with children, we see growth suppression. And as I said, even temperature regulation, all of this is just completely out of whack. And I said, so that's the long-term consequences. I suppose when it comes to sleep deprivation, it's all about the money. Money talks. And sleep deprivation is costing the economy a huge amount of money. And this is just a study done in the UK. There's really nothing, very few kind of scientific studies done in Ireland. But in the UK, you can see here in 2016, it was 4.2 billion. And that's a year, and you can see that 2020, which is only next year, 43. So you can see every year it's going up and up, okay? So by 2030, they think it's going to be about 47 billion, and that's due to loss of productivity. So that's a huge, you can see that this whole problem with sleep is actually getting worse and worse and worse. And I suppose a lot of it is with the invention of the light bulb as well, because we're so, light is such a determinant in our whole sleep-wake cycle. But as I said, technology as well, which is great in medicine, it can also hinder or when it comes to sleep as well, and I will talk about that as well. But this whole area of sleep disorders is big business. I know even myself, from people that are coming to see me in clinic, people have spent a fortune on over-the-counter remedies, gimmicks online to try to help them sleep. And really, they are just gimmicks, but people are so desperate to get a good night's sleep, they will literally try anything, okay? The other thing as well, just going back on this whole productivity, it's not just absenteeism. You know, most people that sleep well or sleep poorly, they still have to get up in the morning to go to work. It's the whole idea of the whole area of what we call presenteeism. You might have somebody sitting on a chair and work, but they're really not working to their best of their ability. And I know myself, I would be brought into more and more companies where they're trying to get the very best out of their employees. So sleep is one of the things that they need to address and make sure that their employees are getting the best quality sleep in order to get the best possible way of them working the next day. So why are we sleepy? Okay. And there are actually over 80 sleep disorders, and that always continues to amaze people, you know. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll go through a couple of quick ones that you may have heard of. we have these intrinsic sleep disorders, so something innate in the body that's causing you not to sleep well. So that can be insomnia, which is the most common one. But we also have another one, which I know in the sleep lab would be more common to see, because the insomniacs tend not to get to the sleep lab in the first place, is obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. And this is where people snore. They have breathing problems, so they have pauses in their breathing just while they sleep. They can be getting up to go to the toilet. They feel very sleepy during the day, because what's happening is it's all to do with the airway, and the airway is actually closing in on itself. So one of the major symptoms is snoring, but not all snorers have sleep apnea. You can be just a simple snorer, but if there's snores and then there's a pause and then there's another couple of snores, that may be an indication that there's these apneas or stoppages in breathing or cessation in breathing. And that, what can happen then as the airway closes, there's drops in the oxygen levels, and that then, those lower oxygen levels sends the signal to the brain saying, right, okay, this lad's not breathing or woman's not breathing properly, and the brain's way of rectifying that is from dragging you out of a deeper sleep back to a very, very light sleep. It's really the body's way of trying to keep you awake. So you get very little good quality sleep, the sleep is very fragmented, and plus the brain is being deprived of oxygen. So that's a really kind of nasty one, and that is the one that if you do have significant sleep apnea, we can nearly, and it goes untreated, you can nearly guarantee you're going to end up with high blood pressure and all the cardiovascular diseases that go along with that. Narcolepsy is another one, which is a neurological sleep disorder, and that's been highlighted a lot recently because of the swine flu vaccination. That was a cause of an increased population of narcolepsy. Hypersomnia, where people sleep too much. Then we have this extrinsic sleep disorders. So that's where people are just not getting enough sleep. And that's a lot of the time we're really starting to neglect our sleep. There's this whole culture in the office. Oh, look, I've been in the office till 11 or 12 o'clock at night. There's big projects on, and look at me, I'm great. I'm back in here at 6 o'clock in the morning. So there's this whole culture around saying, do you know what? I'm much better than you because I'm getting by on less sleep than you. Okay, you might be getting by on less sleep, but I'm probably going to be much more productive than you. Okay, but we have to get rid of that whole culture of, you know, I don't need my sleep, I can do without it. You can't. Very few people can do, can function properly on very, very little sleep. Also then you have alcohol and hypnotic and stimulant dependence as well can affect your sleep. Circadian rhythm disorders, as I said, jet lag, if you're lucky enough to get off on a nice foreign holiday, shift work disorder, and then you've delayed or advanced sleep phase syndrome. Again, going back to that rhythm where it can be either push forward or push back. Teenagers, for example, can be quite common, delayed sleep phase syndrome. So it's normal for teenagers not to feel sleepy till maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay. Parasomnias. This is all the abnormal activity and stuff you shouldn't be doing when you're asleep. So we have the sleepwalking, we have nightmares, and then we have REM behaviour disorders. And sometimes that can actually even be linked to Parkinson's disease as well. So as I said, these sleepwalking can be more common in children, teenagers, but if you're an adult and it's happening to you on a regular basis, then you need to get something done about it. And then you have the medical and psychiatric associated disorders. So you have all the panic ones, the dementia, nocturnal epilepsy, Parkinson's, etc. So there, as I said, a very quick synopsis of all the sleep disorders and reasons why we can be sleepy. Throughout this, I'll just be, insomnia is kind of my area, so I'll be talking about that majority of the time. But if anybody has any other questions on any of these, I'll happily answer them at the end. So, when we talk about psychiatric disorders, nearly every psychiatric or any of the mental health disorders, nearly every single one of them has some impact on the person's ability to sleep. So it's so important that we address the sleep, because what we say now is sleep has a bi-directional relationship with mental health. And what that basically means is that, and particularly when we talk about insomnia can lead to some of these mental health disorders. and then the mental health disorder has an impact on our ability to sleep. So it's a vicious cycle. It's kind of like the chicken and egg. We don't know which comes first, but we're actually starting to think that insomnia is actually a risk factor for the mental health disorders, and especially depression. And when people come into me, you know, when they've been diagnosed with insomnia, part of my job is to say, look, you are more vulnerable to all these mental health disorders, particularly depression. So it is important that we really start to look and manage our sleep and to look after our sleep. Insomnia again is the one of probably the most common sleep disorder, and there's been a lot of research done with sleep and depression, and we know that nearly over 80% of people with depression also have insomnia. Okay, and even as people get older, they're more vulnerable to the insomnia as well. Hypersomnia is where people sleep too much or oversleeping. That's more, when it comes to depression, it's more likely seen in younger people. But again, it's really more the insomnia. And a lot of people come to see me and they say, look, I don't know, I haven't been, diagnosed with depression, or they have been diagnosed with depression. And they say, look, I didn't know anything about depression, but I just knew I couldn't sleep. And a lot of those do actually go on and get a diagnosis of depression. So the insomnia is a great marker for a depressive episode down the line. So as I said, it's an independent risk factor for the development of depression, but it also increases the risk of its occurrence as well. So if you have been diagnosed with depression, it's really, really important that you actually target your sleep alongside the depression. We also know that if somebody has depression and insomnia, the risk of suicide increases threefold. Okay, so those kind of statistics kind of talk for themselves. Again, taking the insomnia out of it, a lot of these mental health disorders actually change that whole structure of sleep. Remember I was saying that if that sleep architecture is not in that proper structure, it's going to affect how you function the next day. So we know that just taking depression, it impairs the continuity of sleep. So you might get off to sleep, okay, but you can't stay asleep. So it just completely fragments this whole sleep. You may be getting less sleep as well. It decreases N3 sleep, which is the really good deep sleep that you need to feel repaired and everything restores itself. It decreases the REM latency. What that means is normally it takes somebody with normal sleep, it takes them about 90 minutes to go into dream sleep, but somebody with depression, they go into dream sleep in less than 90 minutes, okay? That can also be an indication that they're sleep deprived. But even sometimes when I used to be analysing sleep, when I was finished and did up a report, I could tell so much about that person, but I had never met them. I was just literally looking at their sleep. We also know in people with depression that the duration of the REM cycle in the early part of the sleep period is actually increased, because usually the first REM cycle is actually the shortest, okay? It prolongs the first REM period, increases REM duration. So it really affects REM sleep quite a bit. And we do think that REM sleep is to do with all the emotions, okay? And when you think about it, antidepressants reduce REM sleep because they're REM suppressants. And it also increases the number of eye movements in REM. We're not too sure why that happens, but we know what happens. So as I said, even taking out insomnia, the depression really changes that pattern of sleep. So, talking about insomnia. Insomnia, we think it's affecting about 10 to 15% of the population, again, which is a huge portion of the population. That's pretty much like the amount of people that actually have asthma. And we all know asthma and we talk about it, but we don't really talk too much about insomnia. There are a lot of different classifications exist, but what we use is the DSM-5, and that's just has changed in the last couple of years. But there are different types of insomnia, and a lot of the time people will come into me and they say, oh, I'm here, but I don't know if I should be here because I don't have a problem getting off to sleep. We all think of insomnia as just lying in bed at the start of the night for hours and hours and not being able to sleep. But a huge portion of insomniac patients, they have absolutely no problem getting off to sleep, but they can't stay asleep. And that's what we call sleep maintenance insomnia. We also have the one, obviously, where there's difficulty falling off asleep. And then we also have another type where we can have early morning awakenings. Again, these early morning awakenings can be an indication that there is a depression disorder there as well. And then also you're getting unrefreshed or unrestorative sleep, or just very restless sleep, and that's despite adequate opportunity to get to sleep. As I said, it's actually changed since 2013. Prior to this, when the new guidelines came out, they always looked for a cause of the insomnia. Is there another disorder there? Say, for example, if depression was there, okay, we'll treat the depression and sure the sleep will sort itself out. We now know that is not the way it goes, okay? Insomnia is now a disorder in its own right, okay? And it must be treated independently of any other disorder that's there. You know, there could be some other sleep disorder there as well, but you must treat the two independently. So again, the other kind of difference that came in the new guidelines, which I really like, it's not just a nighttime problem. Okay, we know there's a problem with the nighttime and sleep, but remember it's a 24-hour cycle. So it has all these daytime consequences, but you only need one of those on that list. And if you tick off one of those, you have a problem with sleep, and it's going on for 3 months or more, you're into the chronic stage, and that's where you really need intervention, okay? Again, as I said, just how the whole insomnia can just break down that whole pattern of sleep. So there's the normal one, and as you can see, this is just a typical, you know, it's taking them a long time to get off to sleep. They're getting off to sleep, but they're not even staying asleep, okay? So the whole sleep is very, very fragmented. And a lot of the time, people with insomnia get an awful lot more sleep than they think they are, because when you add up all the bits of sleep, they could be getting 7 or 8 hours, but because it's not consolidated sleep, it's obviously not good quality, and they're not feeling the effects of it, okay? Common causes. This, as I said, is one that you can readily get if you look at all the studies that's been done. As I said, you can have all different types of disordered breathing can cause insomnia, other medical conditions, and there's a whole load of them there. Psychiatric disorders, lifestyle. Look, there is so many things that can cause. There's no one, or, you know, I don't like to group them into these little groups, because I know from experience anything can cause insomnia. Any kind of change to life, whether it be good or bad, is going to have an impact on your ability to sleep. It can be short term, which is transient insomnia, but then it can go on to develop into a longer insomnia problem. But I said, really anything. And sometimes I get people say, look, I can't put a finger on when my whole problem with sleep started. It can go back to when they were a child and their parents reported that they were never good sleepers. So it's just not, just because it's not on the list there doesn't mean, you know, it's not going to be a cause. Because when we talk about insomnia, there are 3 parts to the whole insomnia disorder. And this is what we all look at. First of all, what we call these predisposing factors. You could be the type of person that's a bit more vulnerable to getting insomnia, okay? You can be female, which ups your chances of having insomnia. You could be a worrier or an overthinker, or you can have what we call social factors, things like people that are recently retired, unemployed, shift workers. But just because you have those traits doesn't necessarily mean, yes, you're going to go on to get insomnia, because the next thing is there has to be this stressor or this kind of trigger that starts about sleepless nights. And this brings us to these precipitating factors. And that's where the last slide kind of ties in. But I said it could be medical illnesses, psychiatric illnesses, it can be anything. This bit, it can literally be anything. This is where, you know, usually that stressor, it can be short term. Usually if the stressor is no longer an issue, then the sleep goes back to normal. So that's a kind of a transient insomnia. And that's where kind of things like medication can come in handy. But what can happen is, and I see this all the time, people can identify a stressor, maybe it could be 10, 20, 30 years previously, but they're saying, right, well, that's no longer an issue. But why has my sleep not gone back to a normal pattern? So the stressor is no longer there, but the sleep is still the problem. And this brings us on to the third, where we call these perpetuating factors. Because when you start to sleep poorly, you probably fall into bad habits. Things like you might be going to bed a little bit earlier or trying to catch up with the weekends. You can nap. You can be relying a little bit too much on coffee. And you start to spend a little bit more time in bed than you should do. So these habits are now keeping the problem going. And what happens then is, because you have really no pattern of sleep and you repeat it night after night after night, it now becomes the normal. So your no pattern of sleep, the body recognises that as being the normal. So that's why it's a learned behaviour, okay? And that's what we call psychophysiological insomnia, okay? And that's where the real chronic, that's really the long-term insomnia where intervention is really needed. And medication is probably not the best way to go for that. As I said, there's two types of treatment. Medication has always been kind of historically the way to go, but we now know that's not the way to go, okay? Medication should really only be used or prescribed for about 2 weeks at a time, okay? We now know that the long-term treatment of choice is what we call cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia. And that's laid down by our governing body in sleep medicine. It's the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Unfortunately, access to CBT-I is very, very limited in this country. So, medication. Why can we not just pop a pill and then our sleep will be fine? We now know, as said, long term, it's not good, okay? You can have this hangover effect the next day, you can feel groggy. It really affects your ability to drive, particularly if you're not sleeping and you say, right, it's about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you have to be up at 7, I need sleep, I'm going to take a tablet. So you take your sleeping medication, 3 or 4 o'clock, you're up at 7 and you sit in and you drive your car. That's not good. You shouldn't be doing that, okay? In older people, we know that it leads to memory loss and falls, and it's an increased risk of falls in older people. Also, older people tend to be on more medication, and it can really interact with other medications as well, which is not good. And really what happens is they just stop working. Your body becomes very dependent on it. So you can start off on a low dose, but you have to keep increasing the dose to have the same effect. And you get to and most people who come in to see me are already on medication, but it's not working. They're still having difficulty getting off sleep, and they're certainly having difficulty maintaining sleep. So really, it doesn't work long term, okay? And look at what it causes: anxiety, sleeplessness and depression. And really, the sleeplessness is why you started taking it in the first place. So it's kind of defeating everything that it's meant to be doing. So as I said, medication is just not the way to go. Scary statistics are, though, that 1 in 10 take a drug to help them sleep. Remember as well that a lot of these are sedatives. They're actually sedating the body. Sedation is completely different to sleep. Okay, so even with these, they're not giving you that proper architecture of sleep either, okay? And again, this is a study, results out of England. Over 10 million prescriptions are written every year in England for sleeping medication. So that's a huge amount of sleeping pills. The other thing as well is a lot of people are taking these and they're not prescribed them. They're taking them from their friend, or they're actually buying them online as well, which is actually really, really scary, okay? So medication, short term, absolutely fine. There's definitely a role to play. Long term, not the way to go. This is the way to go long term, okay? So this cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, it's a very structured program. And it's been around for the last about 15 years or so, and it's basically all about changing the way you think about sleep, because a lot of the time we have unrealistic expectations or misperceptions about sleep. We also have these faulty beliefs about how our insomnia is going to affect us the next day. And the other thing as well is our behaviours, okay? We fall into these bad habits. The good thing about CBT-I is it's got an over 80% success rate as long as the patient is motivated, and majority of people, by the time they get to me, they're so desperate they will literally give it 110% to get the problem fixed. And as I said, this is now the long-term treatment of choice. This program with CBT-I will do you for the rest of your life. okay? And as I said, a lot of people would come in being on medication long term. The goal is always to get off that long-term medication, and they do. But it's basically giving you, the patient themselves, the control over it, because a lot of the time when you're lying there at night and you can't sleep, you just do not know what to do for the best, and you're tossing and turning, and the anxiety, etc., is kicking in. And when I'm talking about this whole kind of the anxiety, our thoughts actually have a huge role to play in our ability to sleep, okay? This is just a nice little study. It's a very small study. It was only done on about 63 patients, but it's nice to kind of show that what we think about before we sleep, because remember, our whole preparation for sleep starts long before we get into the bed, okay? And particularly before bed, what we think about, or what we think about when we get into bed, has a huge impact on this ability to sleep. So again, it's all about these dysfunctional beliefs, okay? As I said, it was only done on about 63 people, but you can see here, what kind of things do we think about when we're in bed and we can't sleep? So we can be thinking about family, we can be thinking about insomnia, we can be thinking about the sleep environment, and this, because they were in a different environment, they were thinking about how the study was going as well. So as I said, the other interesting thing is that all of these kind of thoughts that we actually have, they're kind of similar whether somebody has been diagnosed with a major depressive disorder or somebody that there's no evidence of depression. The thoughts seem to be pretty similar. So the other thing to remember is that all of these thoughts, as I said, the thoughts, they also give rise to emotions. And when you think about somebody that is there's no kind of history of depression there, but when they get into bed at night, the bed starts to represent anxiety, frustration, restlessness, guilt, sadness, and that's literally because the way we think when we're lying in bed and can't sleep at night is completely different than the way we think when we're awake and alert. We're always thinking about worst case scenario, what's going to go wrong, what could go wrong, and it's all these negative thoughts and emotions that's attached to this, and that can hugely affect our ability to sleep, because what's happening is it's increasing this thing called cortisol. Cortisol is being kind of probably a little bit more known nowadays than it was previously, but it's our stress hormone, okay? When we're stressed, usually during the day, our cortisol levels increase if we have some kind of stress, and usually when that stress passes, the cortisol levels decrease again. And usually come early evening into nighttime, cortisol levels should be at their absolute lowest. And that is a way of basically helping the body or to prepare for sleep. But what happens is with this, and it's normal to have stress, a certain amount of stress. It's basically the body's, as I said, the body's alarm system. So during the day, absolutely fine, we're all going to have a little bit of stress, but the cortisol levels start to come down. But the problem is where there's this long-term activation of this stress response. And what can happen is all of this stuff, it can lead to anxiety, depression, digestive problems, headaches, heart disease, sleep problems, weight gain, okay, and memory and concentration impairments. When people start to have a problem with sleep, if you think about it, they actually start to nearly dread going to bed, because bed now is a place where they have all these thoughts and all these negative emotions. So they're now not thinking of bed as this nice, relaxed, restful place. They're thinking of it as the busy mind, the restlessness, the worry, the stress, the frustration. That's now what bed represents to them. So this whole connection between bed and sleep is now getting broken down. Bed is not that nice, relaxing place where you go to have a nice rest. So as I said, this cortisol level plays a huge impact, or plays a huge role on that. Because if you're thinking or you're worrying about going to bed, cortisol levels are high. And we now know, and just to show here, just to kind of put in this chart very basically, people with insomnia have higher levels of cortisol prior to going to bed, whereas a good sleeper have really low levels of cortisol. And if your levels of cortisol are quite high, it's actually probably going to stop you getting off to sleep. But if you do get off to sleep, it really impacts your ability to stay asleep. And you can have all this what we call hyperarousal. So there's these little kind of fast bits of activity running along the brainwave, even though that you're going into these deep stages of sleep. So it really kind of causes a very restless sleep. So it's so important that we have relaxation time prior to bed. So this, about an hour and a half to 2 hours, you need to completely switch off before bed. We're all now rushing home from work, preparing the dinner, working in bed, doing all of the things that we shouldn't be doing, running around getting the last bits of the housework done. And that's getting the stress hormones up. We need to completely wind down, okay? In bed then as well. So you stop all work activities 2 hours before bed. You have this very structured pre-bedtime routine, and you also can do what we call a progressive muscle relaxation technique for when you get into bed. That can be, it's like a guided technique for about 20 minutes to help the body relax, but also to help your muscles relax, because muscle tension can be a side effect of this high cortisol levels, and also not sleeping because you're really tense because you don't know what tonight's going to bring. And that muscle, that kind of technique that you do in bed should last maybe about 20 minutes. Sleep hygiene, what things we can do to kind of make our sleep better, okay? Usually if you go to your GP, they will give you a list of, here are the 10 things to do to get you sleeping better. And that's what we call sleep hygiene. And we're all very conscious of sleep hygiene, but sleep hygiene alone will never ever fix our problem with sleep. It's the stuff we should all be doing, even the good sleepers, to ensure we keep having a good night's sleep. And it's all to do with our environment. Remember I was saying that our whole sense of time has been taken away from us by our environment. And you can see we now have the bedrooms, we have the nice flat screen TVs, and we might have the nice fireplaces in the bedrooms. If you look there quickly, you nearly think, is that a living room or is it a bedroom? Okay. We have the phones in the bedroom. We have the laptops in the bedroom. We have the books in the bedroom. We have these, and I've seen a patient with this where they have the alarm clock and it puts out this light or it shines the time up on the ceiling, okay? Not good. We have the games, okay? Just a couple of weeks ago, I had all the parents ringing up, really stressed. Children were having problems sleeping, it was coming up to exam time. They all had these things in the room, okay? Radio's in the room, and of course we're all having the nice breakfast in bed because it's all about social media and getting a nice picture to put on Instagram. So this now, we don't know what the bedroom is now for. We have to get back to the very, very basics. Bed is for sleep, okay? Because now the whole connection, your mind is getting into bed, but it doesn't know what it's there for. Sometimes it's reading, sometimes it's watching telly, sometimes it's doing a bit of work. You have to get back to basics. Bed is for sleep. Bed is not designed for anything else, okay? Caffeine is a huge issue as well because we now use this as a tool to keep us awake, because if you're sleepy, you need to get through the day. What do? You guzzle down the caffeine. I could probably leave here and I could probably find a Starbucks or something that's open, or I'll go into, I have a long drive home. Will I go in and have a cup of coffee? No, because what happens is this whole thing, during our wakeful hours, we are producing a thing called adenosine. And adenosine accumulates during our wakeful hours, and adenosine makes us feel sleepy. What caffeine does is it blocks the adenosine. So it actually works as a stimulant. And while it can be good short term for the likes of driving, etc., really you shouldn't be intaking any kind of caffeine from about 2 o'clock onwards, because it takes it about 9 hours to leave your system. So if you have a nice big cup of coffee, 6 o'clock in the evening, it's nearly 3 o'clock in the morning by the time that stimulant has left your body, okay? So caffeine is really not the way to go. This is basically just to show us that your intake of caffeine is probably even higher than you think, because it's hidden in an awful lot of products, chocolate being one of them. Okay, but also a lot of the herbal teas, if they're green tea based, also has caffeine. So you'd be surprised. So if you root around the cupboard at home, you'd be surprised what contains caffeine. A lot of the cold and flu remedies, caffeine. Any of the diet supplements can be caffeine. So as I said, it's really, our intake is much higher than it should be. Light. Light is the biggest determinant of when we sleep and when we wake. So you can actually manipulate your light levels in your home to actually give these signals to the body to tell it when it's light or when it's night and when it's morning. We are all, I said, we're here sitting under the light. That's sending a signal to our body because the body responds really well to cues. So it's sending a signal, you should all be awake because it's bright, okay? So what you can do is you dim the lights in the living areas from about 9 o'clock at night, because now you're sending this signal to the body, the levels of light are coming down, and really what you're trying to do is recreate sunset. Okay, because now what's going to happen is your melatonin levels are going to start to increase. In the bedroom, you need complete darkness, okay? No kind of side lights or lights coming in over doors, or complete darkness, pitch black dark, okay? So you can get things like blackout blinds, eye masks are great, particularly this time of year, because usually, not probably these mornings, but it can be bright before 5 o'clock. That's a signal to your body. If the light's coming into your room, you should be awake, okay? The other thing as well this time of year, noise, the birds singing. Earplugs can be something as simple as earplugs can actually stop that happening. But light levels are crucial. Winter mornings, if you're trying to get out of bed at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, it's pitch black dark. That's a signal to be awake or to be asleep. So you get a light source on as quickly as possible to help to tell the body it's bright, I should be awake, and stop that melatonin being released. Smart devices, huge problems with our sleep. Again, 90% of adults, this was done in 2014, and 75% of children reported at least one smart device in the bedroom. Smart devices are certainly here to stay. They're part of our lives. I couldn't do without mine, but when it comes to sleep, they're having a huge impact on our sleep-wake cycle. They produce blue light. Blue light cuts down on our melatonin, okay? So all smart devices need to be shut down about 2 hours before bed. So it's, as I said, it's stopping or impeding our production of melatonin, but also you have the whole cognitive stimulation that goes along with that as well. And again, if you're not sleeping, you have the phone beside you in bed, what are you going to do? You're going to pick it up, you're going to look at the time, you're going to maybe start looking at social media, and that's just going to keep you awake, okay? Temperature is a huge factor in our sleep-wake cycle. Cooler is always better. Optimum room temperature, 18 degrees Celsius. And again, it all goes back to this rhythm, okay, to keep this whole good circadian rhythm in good working order. So again, you can send a cue to the body, because remember, if you're having a problem with sleep, this whole rhythm is out of sync. So what you can do is you can have a timed shower at around 8 o'clock at night. So what you're doing is you're bringing up your core body temperature. If you bring it up, it's going to have to fall. So you're actually just recreating that natural process that needs to happen. So the problem with time showers, sometimes we do it too close to bedtime. You know, if you're coming in from the gym or whatever, 9, 10 o'clock at night, if you push that here, you're now having your shower here. You're now pushing this whole phase, you're pushing it. So you're not going to be feeling sleepy at 11. You're just pushing everything forward. So temperature has a huge role to play in sleep, okay? Stimulus controlled therapy is a part of the program that we use in CBT-I, and this is all about, again, as I said, the bed starts to you don't start to associate the bed with sleep anymore. The bed is anxiety, frustration, reading your book, watching the TV, and sleep is just because you start to spend quite a long time in bed. And what happens then is you only have a small portion of that time asleep. So again, the body's saying, what am I here to do? Am I here to sleep, or am I here to do some of that other stuff? The other thing as well is we start to go to bed because I didn't sleep well last night, I better go to bed a little bit earlier today, and probably, you know, if I'm here longer in bed, I'll probably have more of a chance of falling asleep. That's actually the wrong thing to do. What you need to do, and people always ask me, what's the best time to go to bed? I'm like, when you feel sleepy after a certain time. So if everybody goes, say one of the first questions I ask people is, what makes you decide when to go to bed? I always get the same answers. It's when a certain program is over, when everyone else has gone to bed, I'm bored, or I think I have to be in bed at that time. You always, so if you have a kind of, I always go to bed at 11. What I would do tonight is say, okay, you get to 11 o'clock. If you're feeling sleepy, off you go to bed. But if you're not feeling sleepy at 11, don't go to bed. You need to wait until you're feeling sleepy, okay? Again, bed's only for sleep. 15-minute rule, you should really only be in bed awake for about 15 to 20 minutes. If you're still awake after that time, it's not happening. You're better off, get up, out of the bedroom and go to an area, a living area, read a book and just relax until you feel sleepy again, okay? And no napping, because napping eats into that need for sleep. So that's a really bad habit to have. Sleep restriction therapy, and this is always confusing to people because again, they start to spend longer times in bed because they think I've more of an opportunity to sleep here. But in fact, what we do to counteract that problem is I restrict people's time in bed, which is a complete shock to the system. So again, it's all about getting them to increase what we call their sleep efficiency. It's not about numbers. We don't know how much sleep they need. We have to strip it all back, make them really sleep deprived. So the more sleep deprived you are, the more likely you are to fall asleep quickly and to stay asleep. So you're sleeping 90% of the time that you're in bed, and that's what you should be doing. If you're not sleeping 90% of the time, you're doing something wrong, okay? And this is where I can use the sleep diaries can actually come in very handy, because I said at the very start, it's difficult to know, how did I sleep in the last couple of nights? Because you can't remember. And you always over-exaggerate the problem with sleep if you can't remember. And this whole thing with sleep restriction, it kind of shocks the body clock back into some kind of a normal pattern. And people say to me, like they ring me up when they do this, it's really tough. But they're saying, Breege, I'm really struggling. Like I'm actually struggling to stay asleep or to stay awake here. And I'm like, have you heard what you just said? You came in with a completely different problem. You came in struggling to fall asleep. Now you're actually struggling to stay awake. And that's when it kind of something just, the light bulb comes off then. And I say, right, yeah, I'm fixing the problem here. And the last thing, and one of the most important thing, is about this routine and regularity. The body thrives on routine and regularity, and particularly when it comes to sleep. Sleep cannot cope with any kind of change. That's why the whole lie-ins at the weekend can have such a problem or a knock-on effect on our ability to sleep the following and consequent days. Jet lag, for example. That for every hour of a time zone that we push the body or we travel, it takes the body a day to recover. So when we're all trying to catch up with our sleep at the weekends, you know, so if you have a 2 or 3 hour, say take a 3 hour lie-in at the weekend, you'll find probably on Sunday night you can't fall off asleep and you're exhausted Monday morning because you've pushed your body by 3 hours. You've nearly gone to New York and back over the course of a weekend. And then by the time you recover, you're nearly into the weekend again. So this whole pushing and shoving, it's like shift work. The body is just not designed for it. And when we talk about regularity, your get-up time is far more important than your going to bed time. Your get-up time actually regulates and anchors that whole body clock. So no weekend lie-ins, and even good sleepers is only an extra hour of sleep, okay? But as I said, routine during the day as well, like meal times, for example, to give the body a sense of time. It's routine over that 24-hour cycle. If you don't have routine during the day and you have a chaotic daytime, you can't suddenly expect to put your head in the pillow and then have routine. It just doesn't work like that. It's a 24-hour cycle and it's a 7-day week, because when it comes to sleep, there's no weekend, okay? So, just very last thing, where next? As I said, this whole thing with CBT-I and sleep, it is really not being given the importance that it should be, okay? The HSE, for example, I've looked at their website last night and they've actually updated it, and it's very good and it's very snazzy and it's talking about mental health and insomnia and it's great. But actually CBT-I is not available on the public health system. There's actually only 3 of us doing it privately in the whole country. The other thing that I noticed, that all the content they had on the lovely website was actually supplied by the NHS, okay, which doesn't really fill me with confidence, okay? They copy and paste at it again. So as I said, the other thing as well is a lot of GPs and consultants, when you think about it, it really starts in medical school. GPs, trainee doctors, they really only get a couple of hours lecture time dedicated to sleep. And sleep medicine is such a multidisciplinary area that they don't know about it either, because they just haven't been taught. So that really has to change as well. Schools, the children need to start to know the importance of sleep as well. So that's really important. Employers, they need to be proactive as well. I have to say some of the bigger ones are actually, because it's probably for selfish reasons. They want to get the best out of their employers. And the whole thing with social media, everybody now wants to give advice on sleep. It's become a really popular topic. And every week I read some kind of an article by somebody telling you what to do, how to sleep, and it drives me crazy, because I'm like, that's not correct. So as I said, be careful about what you read online, because a lot of it misinformation out there, okay? And now, definitely I'm finished, okay? Anybody wants to contact me, all my details are there, okay? And I've all the social media as well, just to keep with everybody else. So thank you very much.